She had 30 seconds to depart the grounds, or else she would be taken into custody. The gang headed out. Karen rushed off, but not before informing me it wasn't over. Ruiz turned to me and said, "That woman's about to dig herself into a hole so deep she'll meet the HOA president on the other side of the planet." I stood there, still holding my coffee, staring at the tire impressions of my gravel road and the almost completely rebuilt stables behind me. Marley neighed far away. Peace restored after the noise had stopped. Though I had a strong feeling this was merely the beginning, I couldn't believe how quickly things had turned upside down. Karen was not the kind to go quietly through a bereavement. She will soon do something even more terrible. I knew this too. Her next action, unbeknownst to me, would entail falsified permits, phony security guards, and a scheme that would blow up in her face so spectacularly it would rank first among all entitled people threads on the internet. The morning following the event involving the bulldozer, I felt things would at last cool out. Deputy Ruiz reassured me the legal team of the sheriff's department would be following up with official charges should Karen do anything again. I had formally complained to the department, but peace and quiet seemed alien to the HOA queen since by daybreak my mailbox appeared to have been covered with paper storm damage. Tucked to the post, crammed inside the box, and strewn across the gravel were 12 brilliantly colorful notices. One attached even to the fence post. Tied. Underneath, there was a checklist of manufactured infractions, including excessive manure buildup, lack of proper waste removal system, and suspicion of underground water theft. I peeled off the closest one and read the bold red letters across the top. Twice I blinked and went back over that final section. Underground water theft is a topic. She was generating infractions right now. By mid-morning, I had a new guest. This time, a white city-marked SUV stopped carrying animal control emblazoned on the side, walking out with a clipboard and camera around her neck. A serious-looking police-looked Officer Hill introduced herself and said she had gotten an anonymous complaint regarding neglected horses on my property. I informed her I already knew the person submitting it. She said nothing, but her little eye roll exposed her. I consented when she asked to see the animals, guiding her down the stable's road from the side gate. Marley and the others stood coolly in their pens, well-groomed and chewing hay like kings. Each wore a microchipped halter registered to the sheriff's department. Their water was purified. Their hooves were clean. Officer Hill nodded after examining the chips and checking the feed bins. "Everything is in order," she declared. "These horses are most likely in better shape than half the ones housed in public barns." Then Karen materialized on the opposite side of the fence, clutching her phone like though she were shooting a documentary. She yelled, as though this were some sort of sting operation, "There she is." At first, the animal control officer disregarded her, but Karen continued to tell loud stories. "Look at that shady haystack. No roof cover. That violates municipal code. You're on camera. I'm saving this for Judge Judy." Officer Hill turned to me and whispered, "I'm going to go ahead and mark this as a resolved visit. Clearly she's not here for the animals." Karen tried to shout questions at her as she walked back toward the vehicle, but the officer did not bite. She simply crawled in and drove off. As Karen stood by herself with her phone, filming only a bunch of content, healthy horses, I saw her face twitch with annoyance. I sat down at my computer that evening to record everything for the sheriff's office and post a video of the unsuccessful bulldozer try. I recalled what Deputy Rees mentioned about exploring her fictitious authorization. I gathered the email I had gotten from the county's permitting division. The one Karen claimed had permission to destroy my stables. It appeared at first look to be legitimate, case ID, request number, signature. But something didn't quite sit right. I examined the PDX attachment's associated metadata. The permit application came from a public access port connected to the HOA office. The IP address of the digital signature tracked back to the HOA network. I then came upon the email applied for usage. Like eli.charcos@outlook.com, I had never written the email. To file the permission, someone else had pretended to be me. I looked at the screen for a whole minute. Karen had transcended her enraged HOA president. She was really engaged in fraud. Within the hour, I got a call back from Ben, the deputy who had first requested me to board the horses. I forwarded everything to Deputy Ruiz with a letter saying she forged my identity. He became enraged. He stated I should be ready in case Karen moved once more, as the sheriff was already getting ready with legal paperwork. Next time they intended to catch her red-handed. I wanted to know what I should do in the interim. Ben advised just keep calm and keep watching. She will excavate her own hole. She started digging faster than we had anticipated. Turns out, I heard drilling outside of my western fence line the next day. When I went to investigate, I was shocked to discover a half-built wooden wall 7 feet high, thick with cheap plywood panels and badly painted beige to resemble the nearby homes. Nearby, Karen was guiding 2 employees in jackets bearing HOA brands. Approaching her straightforwardly, I asked her what she thought she was doing. Grinning, she said, beautifying the neighborhood boundary. I brought out the survey stakes, which plainly showed that 3 feet inside my property boundary the new wall was under construction. She wavered her hand to discount that. We have an easement agreement, she replied. You'll get used to it. I said to her straightforwardly that I would be phoning the sheriff once more. That's when things started to get very odd. That evening, while I was walking Marley trotting behind me around the perimeter, 2 uniformed soldiers showed up at my front gate. Their clothing appeared to be those of law enforcement, badges, belts, radios, but something was wrong. Among them, one identified himself as Officer Bradley from HOA Community Enforcement. He instructed me to leave the area behind the new fence and said I was trespassing on HOA-monitored land. From his belt, the other man started unhooking a plastic zip tie as though he were ready to confine me. I got ID from both males. Neither wore a badge with a number. I didn't back down, one flashing a plastic security card with HOA Patrol Volunteer Division. I said, unless you're law enforcement, I suggest you leave. One of them moved forward and grabbed my arm. It took only that to do. On my phone, I pushed the emergency button. 10 minutes later, 2 actual deputies arrived, Ruiz and Ben. The entire tone shifted when they entered and observed the circumstances. The second they discovered these men were posing as actual police, trying to hold a citizen on private property. Ben told both them to wait while their IDs were checked and to take seat. Mid-scene, Karen arrived ranting about HOA rights and property lines, but she stopped when Ruiz told her the men she hired were under investigation for posing as law enforcement agents. There were handcuffs on both fictitious cops. Ruiz had a body camera rolling all along. The best part, one of the horses, Marley, chose to push his nose over the fence and nudge one of the arrested men's heads during the entire cuffing process, like he knew justice was being done. Karen yelled that she would sue the entire county and make complaints against the sheriff's office. Ruiz answered coolly, "You may want to retain a criminal defense attorney before you talk about lawsuit." The narrative was virtually instant on social media. Ruiz's body cam combined with my security camera footage produced a montage so ludicrous it looked like something out of a horrible reality show. Karen shrieking at uniformed deputies, phony officers being detained, a sheriff's horse observing like a disapproving judge. Reshared on Reddit's entitled people and public freakout subreddits, the video went on TikHub. The views exceeded 50,000 within several hours. The count was in the hundreds of thousands by dawn following. Messages from people I hadn't heard from years came in. One local news station even contacted me for an interview. Though I knew Karen wasn't done, even if it was good to see her at last facing some opposition, her ego would prevent her from losing that readily. Her discussion of consulting legal counsel and countersuing the county also revealed one thing. The next stage of her craziness was just about to start, and I was going to find Karen still had more tricks up her nicely ironed sleeve. If I thought phony cops and bulldozers were the height, I heard the metallic clanging down my gravel road once more just after dawn. First, I assumed perhaps it was more construction workers still attempting to put that outrageous beige wall together. But what I saw when I rounded the bend opened my jaw. The wall was completed mostly. Now, though, barbed wire extended across the top like some sort of small jail fence. The worst thing about it is I used to reach the stables from the back gate, but it had been totally shut. My own gate had a padlock and a fresh official sign saying Private HOA Utility Access, "Do not enter." It wasn't like, and just in front of it was Karen, dressed in athletic gear like she had come for an early power walk, but stayed to plan a land invasion. I hardly bothered yelling at all. I called Deputy Ruiz and merely snapped a picture. He ordered me to stay put and that he would send someone straight away. He picked up after the first ring and sighed as soon as I said, "She's put up barbed wire and locked my gate." Karen walked over as like she hadn't just committed trespassing and damage while I waited. Her voice had that arrogant sugar-sweet tone that always preceded her utterance of some ridiculous comment. "You ought to be thanking me," she responded. "That stable was a hazard. We have converted the area for HOA stormwater management." Blinking, I turned to face her. "Stormwater management? There's no drainage system here." She grinned. She patted the padlock like it was a prize and strolled off humming a tune. "Not yet, but it's in the long-term neighborhood improvement plan. You'll get your own copy soon." A different deputy showed up 15 minutes later, one I had not met before. He looked at the wall, the wire, the lock, and then inquired whether I had any property records on hand. I showed him the clear boundary lines, pulled out the land survey maps, and noted the fence Karen's workers had passed. He seemed not shocked, more dissatisfied, like a father handling a child who consistently sets off the fire alarm for amusement, saying he would escalate the report up the chain. He took some images. He also mentioned that, particularly if cattle access was restricted, changing someone's gate on private land could fit under criminal mischief. "Livestock's the sheriff's horses," I said. His eyes raised and he murmured something like, "Oh boy, she picked the wrong stable to mess with." That evening, about 10:30, I saw headlights approaching as if all that had not been enough. Motion alert on my cameras hummed. I first considered maybe it was simply another HOA patrol. Ever since her bogus cop prank failed, Karen had begun assigning volunteers on nocturnal rounds. But when I peered through the window, 2 unmarked SUVs were gently slinking along the fence line. I reached for my phone, accessed the monitoring program, and zipped in. 4 darkly attired individuals, carrying what appeared to be surveying tools or scanners. Except they were inspecting the ground close to the new wall, not defining limits. I texted Ruiz with the footage and set records. 5 minutes later, he claimed he had just heard from the sheriff that the IT team of the department discovered someone had registered a permit for an easement realignment project in my area using bogus coordinates. "Someone's trying to make it look like your land belongs to the HOA on record. It won't work, but it's a serious offense," he added when I questioned what that meant. He stated assistance was already en route when I mentioned the SUVs. Heart thumping, I stood in the dark with lights off. Were they scheduled to excavate anything? Create something from plants? Try to move the record and take the landlines? The SUV crew scattered like raccoons caught in a garbage can when the actual deputies showed there. Still, they did not get very far. Actually, they were not even land surveyors. I had no idea that even existed until Reese showed up grinning and told me Karen had invented a whole subcommittee to justify her obsession with my stables. One of them was a hired contractor from a signage company. They were held by the sheriff's department under interrogation, although they were not prosecuted right away. The department made it clear that even one property line sign would cause rapid escalation should it be changed. I caught gold. I posted it to the same Reddit thread from which my earlier clip went popular. Comments within hours were calling Karen the HOA tyrant of the decade. Every time Karen talked, someone even dubbed in hoarse sounds and altered a dramatic film, including fictitious news anchor comments. The comedy, however, did not lower the risks, as now I knew Karen was trying to modify legal papers to wipe my land, not only blustering and pressuring. That is not HOA junk anymore. That is what is attempted theft. Just as I felt the circus could not possibly surpass itself, the next afternoon I went outdoors to discover still another shock. Karen had put a massive white and glittering blue wooden sign saying future site of HOA Harmony Garden and Reflection Zone coming soon. It had a false donation QR link, floral paintings, and a text at the bottom stating, "Sponsored by HOA Vice President Karen Worthington." She had formally announced her next community initiative as my stable yard. That was the flashpoint I lost. In the yelling sense, I was not angry. In the cool, concentrated lawyer with a filing cabinet sense, I was angry. I returned home, shut the door, switched on every office lamp, and got to work digging. Karen was unaware of my access to more than simply outdated survey maps. I had copied her HOA's own charter, zoning applications from when I first purchased the site, and even archived communications. One phrase especially caught my attention. The HOA will not have control over nearby areas, not properly annexed via mutual consent and recorded transfer. Her worst dream was about to materialize from one sentence. I sent everything to Ben and asked him to check a few things past the legal affairs liaison for the county. They verified anything important within hours. The zoning authorities already highlighted Karen's application to alter the easement for dubious documentation. Their official review hearing was just about ready. Could I be invited? I inquired. Ben added not only would I be invited, I would be the crucial witness. The hearing would be open to public. Before a panel of government officials, Karen would have to defend her phony permits, security volunteers, false fence, and territorial fantasy. I slept that evening better than I have in weeks. I started compiling a list the following morning, covering everything she had done, from the bulldozer to the fictitious police, barbed wire, the midnight mapping crew, false permit filings. All of it was going to be set out exactly before the people with the authority to eventually close her down. I choose not to exact retribution. Her humiliation was not necessary for me. Simply said, I wanted her out of my life. But as luck would have it, the forthcoming hearing would give the most surprising and fulfilling twist in the whole narrative rather than only justice. Since Karen had no idea just how personal it was about to grow, and someone else was about to enter the conflict. The day of the hearing came like a thundercloud on the horizon, loaded with tension and the promise of a reckoning. Tucked my papers into a manila folder, changed into neat jeans and a button-down shirt, and drove to the county administration building, where the zoning board met every second Wednesday. Though not big, the space was crowded. On one side, HOA board members seated in a close whispering cluster. A local television camera was silently setting up close to the corner, probably alerted by someone online. Several neighbors from Karen's neighborhood occupied the back row. Looking about the room, I saw Karen seated at the front, legs crossed, sporting a pale pink suit and the same self-satisfied look like she had already won. Her attorney, a stiff-looking man in a blue blazer, watched over me with the haughtiness of someone who believed this whole thing would be finished in 10 minutes. Comprising 5 members, 3 commissioners, and 2 legal aides, the zoning panel sat behind a raised bench. They went quickly through minor problems once the conference started until they arrived at our case, which they labeled Petition to Modify Easement and Enforcement Dispute, HOA versus Adjacent Property Owner. The chairwoman shouted, "Begin." Straight at Karen's attorney, adjusting her glasses. Karen's lawyer began a speech consisting of meaningless words, including community enhancement, easement conflicts, and mutual benefit. He argued that the stable was too near residential areas and that the HOA had tried to settle things amicably with beautification projects. Regarding the falsified permits, he said it was a clerical mistake. Regarding the bogus officers, he characterized them as 2 enthusiastic neighborhood security volunteers misinterpreted by the community. Even some of the HOA members behind Karen looked dubious by the time he finished. "Mr. Ward, your side." The chairwoman turned to me later. Rising slowly, I gently set a heavy folder on the podium. I started with property deeds proving my land's obvious legal boundary, that which identified it as outside the HOA's authority. I displayed satellite pictures, surveyor marks, and HOA charter extracts declaring they had no legal power over my land. I then arranged the chronology: the illegal demolition order, the phony email, the barbed wire, the padlock gate, the midnight mapping crew, the security impersonators. On a screen they had set, I showed surveillance tape snippets, including the time Karen's volunteers tried to hold me while a sheriff's deputy pulled up in the background. I have nothing to adorn anything with. The data spoke for themselves. The members of the panel hurriedly wrote notes. One commissioner asked Karen's attorney whether he knew the fake permit linked back to the IP address of the HOA office. The man murmured some about administrative uncertainty and assigned blame. Did you authorize the filing of demolition permits under Mr. Ward's name? The chairwoman asked Karen, bluntly, leaning forward. Finally, Karen lacked a practiced response. Blinking, changing her pink blazer, she remarked, I believed it was for the community's safety. Pressed once again, she said, mistakes were made, but I don't think anyone was harmed. That was the incorrect comment to make. At the rear of the room stood a uniformed man. That was Sheriff Donnelly, the department leader overall. Uninvited but welcomed by the chairwoman's nod, he headed toward the front of the gathering. He spoke calmly, clearly, to the panel. I would want to add on record that our mounted patrol unit consists of horses kept stabled on Mr. Ward's property. They were under the protection of Mr. Ward and our staff, while our facility is under constant restoration. Any intervention with them is not only careless, but also a possible hindrance of county activities. The room went still all around. The sheriff went on. Ms. Worthington's conduct not only threatened these creatures, but also upset this department's operations. We are working on a different criminal case involving impersonation of police enforcement, false submission of government records, and identity theft right now. The oxygen was practically audible leaving Karen's lungs. The panel took about 20 minutes to decide. They decided the HOA had no jurisdiction or claim over my land and directed them to remove all signage, barbed wire, and wall within 72 hours. They also said that noncompliance will cause daily penalty of $5,000. They also advised an immediate county probe of the HOA's leadership on abuse of power, saying, "But what about the community garden?" Karen tried to interrupt as they were finishing, but muttering and looks drowned out her remarks. Following the hearing, I left the parking lot feeling for the first time in weeks relief sweeping over me. Still, the shocks were not yet finished. A woman called my name as I went toward my truck. Turning to find a tall woman with short brown hair, sporting a county badge fastened to her coat, Melissa Grant, County Legal Affairs, introduced herself. "You're going to want to read this," she continued, passing me a copy of a different case file. "As it turns out, your HOA pal applied 3 more fraudulently under separate names, yours and 2 neighbors. She is staring at several fees." My phone rang with a message from Ben as I turned over the papers. This was a screenshot. Karen had been formally taken out of her role as HOA president, with effect right away. The next emergency meeting would see a replacement chosen. Together with the screenshot came a brief note. "Told you to bring her rope." She personally tied the knot. The wall had already undergone partial demolition by the time I arrived home. I had no idea whether it was from embarrassment or fear of the fine. The horses appeared to be calmer, almost as though the stress had gone. Perched near the fence, I watched Marley prod the hay bale as though he were recovering his territory. I started to laugh. Through the pandemonium, he had been the most patient creature. Not from the HOA, but from one of its former board members. I got an invitation in my inbox later that evening. It was an apologetic letter along with an invitation to address land rights and neighbor boundaries in the upcoming community town hall. I graciously turned down, but appreciated them for at last seeing sense. The same individual left a second note a day later expressing regret for first electing Karen into power. Apparently regret was spreading more quickly than HOA mailings had ever done. 3 weeks following the hearing, the property once more seemed to belong to me. There was no barbed wire now. County order had eliminated the padlock gate, and the tacky Harmony Garden sign was hauled off like it was radioactive. Quietly early one morning, a crew from the HOA, this time employed by the interim board, showed up and silently tore down the rest of the wall. They also left behind a thank you card someone had written on using what I would have considered to be guilty hands. The card said, "Sorry for all the craziness. We signed neither for this, nor for we expect the stables to remain. Not out of sentiment, but as evidence that at least someone in that mess had discovered their conscience. I kept it on the refrigerator. My mornings were devoid of yelling, paperwork, or bulldozer engines for the first time in months. Just hay bales, hoofbeats, and the odd neighbor from Marley, who had been somewhat famous thanks to the viral video. After finishing their renovations, the sheriff's office volunteered to return the horses. I did tell them, though, they were free to continue using my stables as long as they needed. By then, Sheriff Donnelly, who had become a quite laid-back visitor to the property, pulled me aside one afternoon and informed me the department had decided to formally apply for a small community grant to upgrade the stables. They wished to wire solar panels on the roof, create a little emergency shelter, and upgrade the lights. I let out a gasp. Not only had Karen neglected to demolish my stables, but now the government was ready to support improvements meant to make them even more permanent. I nodded to indicate I would be honored. 2 weeks later, when the county building crew showed there, I stood next to the sheriff and had a complete circle event. Marley waited quietly close by, munching his food while the laborers started putting concrete for the new foundation beams. Wherever there had been anarchy, now rose rebirth. Karen's attempts at eradication of the territory had only guaranteed protection for it. She had ironically made the stables more respectable and robust than they have ever been. The additional improvements were unanimously approved even by the county zoning board. Not hearings, not protests, just a rubber stamp and a handshake. Karen's life had become the identical drama she used on other people. She had totally quit the HOA board following her public fall and left her house just 1 week later. She reportedly relocated out of town. Others mentioned she was lodging with relatives. There were even reports she attempted to sue the county, but her case was thrown out practically right away. Her history of falsified paperwork and security impersonations, mixed with the phony inspector prank, created a trail of legal ramifications, probably following her for years. She was not behind bars, but neither free either. Not from a stain she had left on her own reputation. Being publicly embarrassed was the worst penalty someone who gave great attention to neighborhood aesthetics and image could have. I got another letter a month after her leaving. This one from the newly chosen HOA president. Greg Turner was a retired fireman who had spent more than 20 years living in the area, about a new HOA community policy on boundary respect and external property cooperation. He asked whether I would be willing to consult. Reading the letter made me laugh, not because it was ridiculous, but rather because it was very shockingly good. I gently turned down the invitation, but I offered to send copies of the records I had compiled over my ordeal so they can consult them. I also offered the stables for horse rides or instructional demonstrations, should they ever be planning an event for children or families. His response was brief but real. He penned, "Thank you for setting an example, even if everyone else tried to knock it down." A few weeks later, the community accepted my offer for what the sheriff jokingly called Horse Peace Day. Scores of local families arrived on my farm one Saturday afternoon, now complete with solar-powered lamps and fresh paint. The kids met Marley and the other patrol horses, got to sit in the saddle, and snap pictures next to the gleaming new stables. The sheriff personally arrived in uniform, shook my hand in front of the assembly, and gave me a certificate of thanks on departmental behalf. "No HOA in history has ever inspired this much goodwill," he added, and we chuckled. The people from Karen's previous circle that approached me that day caught me off guard most of the time. One woman who had voted for Karen on the board approached carrying the hand of her small kid. "We had no idea how far she was pushing it," she claimed. "We assumed you were simply being challenging." I informed her under the bridge it was water. To be honest, I had no leftover energy for resentment. Though the battle had been taxing, the result was well worth every second of tension. In fighting someone like Karen, I had reminded an entire community what boundaries, respect, and common sense looked like. Not only defended my land, I will remember one last moment for the rest of my lifetime. On Horse Peace Day, the sun was setting. The throng was beginning to clear. I was taking Marley back to the stable when I came upon a sheriff's cruiser stationed at the fence. Hands on his hips, Sheriff Donnelly emerged grinning. Looking over the meadow, he remarked, "I think we need to make this a regular thing." When I asked him what he meant, he replied, "We are formally designating this land as an auxiliary mounted patrol station. Though daily operations won't change anything, it means your stables, county certified, insured, and protected, are now formally part of our operational plan." Still in awe, I stood there. Originally a friend's favor, what had begun as such now constituted a permanent marriage. First of all, I said nothing. I just extended a hand to shake him. Marley neighed gently behind us as the sun sank beneath the hills and sent long golden streaks over the grass. Looking out over my territory, land Karen sought to grab, destroy, and rewrite. I experienced peace, something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Not only does conflict not exist, but respect, earned and reclaimed, also exists. Starting with a bulldozer, the dream had finished in a salute, a certificate, and a stable stronger than it had ever been. Weeks later, someone emailed me a link to a recent Reddit post. Right now, the video boasts more than 2 million views. Karen tried to demolish a sheriff's horse and got bulldozed by the law instead. The top remark said, "Reading it, sip my coffee, and watch the patrol horses over the fence line in early light from the window." I smiled. As it turned out, justice possessed long memories and hooves.